I woke suddenly from a fitful dream, a reoccurring dream of being lost. Lost within my own home, silent, dark, empty, and unbearably tired. For such is my curse that my fleeting dreams should be filled with such heavy, ominous lassitude that I cannot find in sleep. The time was 3:26 a.m. and my alarm was set for 5 a.m. Knowing that I would never get back to sleep again, I got up. Today was the day I was to leave, but still I had to make it through an entire day of work, and my shift is 12 hours. Since returning from Scotland, if anything, my sleep has only gotten worse, more interrupted and tinged with strange, sometimes unsettling premonitions. With a cup of coffee, I returned to my studio and put on my studio headphones. It was my intention to listen to a mix I had done before going to sleep. It has always been my policy to listen to any mix I do after sleeping on it overnight, and sometimes the result is that I completely reinterpret the song after hearing something with fresh ears. What I had recorded was an ambient piece called The Apostle. Now, I have increasingly tried to distance myself with my ambient music from my collaboration with my brother Dan. And though he encourages me in this endeavor, it is not of the proper format for collaborative work. He is usually complimentary, but I have noticed for almost a year now that he is beginning to regard me in a different way, and that he finds my music unsatisfactory in some way. I could hear that in this mix as I sat there and wondered what even it was that I was trying to do with this song, because it was not a song at all. It was strange, even by my own impression. In truth, I dare say that this is even music. And for the first time, I began to question my own judgment. There was an element of vague expectancy that I did not like, almost like the music was leading to something, but I did not know what it was. I took off my headphones and closed the session, and then I put my computer to sleep. Before leaving the house for work, my wife got up to kiss me goodbye. I told her that I would be careful. And once again, she told me to have a good time. And then I left for work. Trying to keep my mind clear of my upcoming trip was almost impossible. Made even more unbearable due to the face mask requirement during the awful COVID-19 pandemic. I work closely with a crew of which I am in charge. Many years we have worked alongside one another until our very movements have become precise, confident, and effortless. So the requirement that we wear a mask is somewhat redundant, for we are family. They did not notice a drop in my alertness, and the day was routine. At the end of the shift, I was ready for whatever fate would present to me. So, after washing up and changing my clothes in the locker room, I went out to wait the arrival of the driver. He was waiting for me. I went to my car and grabbed my travel bag and put it into the open trunk of his car. He was very familiar with the route to the airport and dropped me off at the right gate before driving away again. I put my mask back on and went to check in. And after a short and smooth process, I went to my gate to await boarding. When we were in the air at the right altitude, I asked the stewardess for a beer. After the second one, I fell asleep with my head resting against the window. Touchdown was uneventful, and after a few minutes I spied a man holding a sign that had a single letter, K. I smiled, but he had recognized me, though we had never met. He took my bag from me without asking. My car is only a short distance away, he said. Welcome to Massachusetts. It was almost midnight, and the air was cool. He opened the door for me, and when I got in, he put my bag on the seat and shut the door. Professor Willoughby instructed me to have a bottle of Scotch whiskey at hand in case you wanted to enjoy a drink during the long drive to his home. Please help yourself, he said. It is on the seat next to you. You may relax and take a nap if you prefer. I will not disturb you. Thank you, I replied mechanically, hoping only to shut my eyes for a few minutes. As he pulled away onto the surrounding freeway, I reached for the bottle and was surprised to see that it was a 21-year-old Glenfiddich. It seemed strange to me to be contemplating drinking in the car, but I was not driving. I was in fact a client, and perhaps the laws were different in this state, so I opened the bottle and poured a small amount into the glass that was left on the seat. I remember tasting the whiskey and thinking how good it was, but soon after I fell asleep until I felt the car jostling along an uneven road. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. This was something I did not expect to see. We were driving down a dirt road. We were driving down an unpaved road, a road with many twists and turns, barely illuminated by the weak, hoary moonlight spreading through the hills like a creeping vapor. The driver saw that I was awake. We are just outside of Arkham, he said. Watch the road. In a few minutes you will see the sign. Arkham does not have many visitors outside of academic elites and students enrolled in the university. There is another way in, but I thought that you would like to see the old way in. The back way in. By moonlight, I saw the dense, wiry vegetation and gnarled, twisted trees that had been left alone hundreds of years. Shrunken by age, forgotten, forlorn vestiges of a desolation outside of time. Stunted trees, stunted, shadowy growth, dark, dismal, abysmal growth coming alive within the darkness like a nocturnal creature of the night. Behind the sick, loathsome trees, I saw the dark hills, silhouetted against the starlight. I saw no signs of life along this road, no buildings, no plowed fields, nor any other thing to give it relevance. Instead, it was bleak, the bleakness that comes down in torrents upon a raised village. It made me think of decay, death. I had always thought that the land in this part of the country was rich and arable. But to see this wasted moorland was both unexpected and unusual. The driver slowed down when the headlights came to light up an old sign of Arkham. It was old and dilapidated, a sign from another time, an untended signpost along an antiquated road. I continued to look out the window as the driver continued to drive. Now there were less trees, but the dense bracken and shrubbery mixed within the overgrown weeds and scrub brush made it look even less hospitable. My mind wandered, pulled along by the call of the unknown. And then we came to an intersection, a crossroads marked by an ancient oak tree with deep crevices and twisted boughs petrified over a vast scale of time. The driver turned to the right, and the headlamps lit up a long stretch of road that seemed to rise slowly. At the top of the crest was another road, a driveway between towering trees. The driveway soon gave way to a pebbled surface as it turned about, revealing a surface of fitted flagstones leading to a large Victorian house, a mansion. "This is the Elwood house," he said. "This is the residence of the professor." The outdoor lights were on, illuminating up the tall, Romanesque pillared columns between which impressive double doors welcomed visitors. The house, being 2 stories, was constructed of red brick in the Victorian fashion and had many beautiful and intricately carved corniced windows. The other thing that caught my attention were the gabled, peaked roofs above the semicircular towers on either side of the front doors. The home was impressively old and enchanting, and it was my guess that the house was probably registered with papers and a long history. The drive leading up to the door was also paved with brick, and I imagined black carriages stopping to let out gentlemen with exquisite ladies by livered students and servants on moonlit nights. The driver opened my door and took my bag, and I followed him into the magnificent house. Inside the door was a large open area with tall, vaulted ceilings and a curling staircase that led to an upper floor. The floor was tiled over which large oriental rugs lay. This is not what I expected to see at all, and I wondered if I may have misjudged the professor. "The professor is in the library," said the driver. "Follow me, please." The driver knocked before entering. A moment later, he opened the door, and I followed him into the library. And there, behind a desk, set off to the side, sat the professor. He stood up when I entered. "Your house is magnificent," I said awkwardly. He smiled warmly. "Are you a student of Victorian architecture?" he asked, as he came around the desk to shake my hand. "I barely understand what it is," I confessed, as I took his hand and shook it. I was very aware that handshaking was frowned upon during the pandemic, but the professor seemed not to acknowledge the changing custom. "It is very late," he said. "Join me for a glass of scotch before you retire to your room for a rest. Francis will put your bag in your room." "Thank you," I replied, looking around the incredible library with awe. Never had I seen something like this. It was 30 feet in depth, at the very least, and high shelves completely filled with books were arranged in a perpendicular fashion like an old-fashioned drawing room. Overstuffed chairs with tables were situated around the room. Ornate lecterns held up open books, globes, and world maps collected dust in the corners. And strange-looking instruments filled the room like an antique museum. I could not help but smile, for this was one of my dreams, and and to see it before me was a confirmation of my dream. He led me to a grouping of chairs around a small coffee table and set down a bottle and 2 glasses that he had picked up. I could not read the bottle. "This is a single malt of rare distinction," he said, "and from listening to your podcasts, I know of your taste for whiskey." "Perhaps some of that was exaggerated," I said with slight embarrassment. "No need to explain," he replied. "I understand the mind of artists and writers very well, and I do not fault you for your own creative license. Now then, perhaps you would also like to enjoy a cigar, unless you had one already on the drive to my home." "No," I answered. "I would never smoke inside of someone's car. I could never do that." "Excellent," he replied as he reached inside of his coat and retrieved 2 cigars with a smile. "This is a Padron Series 1926, number 1. Are you familiar with it?" All I could do was laugh. "This is way beyond my price range," I said. "This is a real treat for me, Professor." "Call me Adrian," he interrupted. "Let us speak like friends, and though we have only just met, I hold out the hope of becoming friends." He held out to me a fine-looking cutter. "V-cut?" he asked. "Of course," I answered. Suddenly the ice was broken between us. After lighting my cigar and tasting it with satisfaction, he took up one for himself. He trimmed it and lit it with skill, like the rudiments of a ritual. Like yourself, I too find great satisfaction in small things. For a few minutes we sat in silence and smoked, and neither of us felt the need to speak. Instead, we were upholding a sacred bond between men of like persuasion, for the art of the cigar is a code of respect. Finally, he spoke. "I have anticipated your arrival, and after finally meeting you, it is my expectation that we may become friends. You have had a long day already, but allow me to briefly tell you why I have invited you. Tomorrow I will have much to tell of, but for now I wish to set your mind at rest. The world in which we live today is a product. The world in which we live today has been constructed from the mind of men and from the understanding of these fundamental paradigms. This is something that you already know. Classical physics is just such a paradigm, using as its language much of the mathematical architecture of Euclid, for it is such axiomatic language that was necessary to describe the world until the time of Newton. When Trinity College was shut down during the plague, Newton retired to his home in the country, and having nothing better to do, studied and learned the entire corpus of mathematics. And it was from this foundation that the calculus was invented. This became the foundation of classical mechanics. Today, such a similar endeavor is impossible, for the different branches of mathematics are so varied and complex that a similar integration could never be accomplished. Instead, these new forms of mathematical construction are singular things in and of themselves, and application of these forms could be generations, if not centuries, from becoming practical. Science has been dissected in this way, and so it is that one mathematician may not even understand the fundamentals of an opposing mathematical construction. Black box radiation helped to break this paradigm, leading to the discovery of the quantum and the formulation of general relativity. These opposing paradigms cannot coexist together, however, prompting new forms of mathematics to describe the minute discrepancies. Ultimately, this paradigm shift led to newer and stranger paradigms, including matrix mechanics, string theory, supersymmetry, to name just a few. But they cannot coexist together because they are of different formulas. The formula of classical mechanics will yield fine discoveries in classical mechanics, but they will not unite branches of contrary science. I tell you this so that I may tell you that another, far older branch of science has existed for more than 800 years. Although it was never understood as science, moreover, it was understood as magic, witchcraft, and sorcery. Ancient writings are replete with stories of supernatural events and unexplainable stories of wizardry, of men being superimposed in two different places simultaneously. Levitation, transmogrification, walking on water, raising the dead, etc. The stories are endless. They were not disbelieved at the time, however, but must first have been established as evil necromancy by the church. And when it was no longer safe for men and women to believe these things, a new form of logic was built up upon it, and this old science became blasphemy. But even during these dangerous times, these apocryphal rudiments of this ancient science were codified by special men who met together in secret societies and pledged themselves together to practice this ancient art. These men knew that these societies could be infiltrated by men bent on their destruction, so they invented new societies, secret societies, for the sole purpose of making the path narrow and difficult to follow. Special nomenclature was invented, along with esoteric symbolism, to disguise the very words being used to understand this esoteric art. The people were fooled, because even to mention such a secret society by name was dangerous. And so the men of our trade were free to publish books and pamphlets intended for the initiate, those taken into our society. Over time, and to this day, such esoterica is considered puerile, harmless, and mostly insignificant. We call such scientific endeavor pseudoscience. And in truth, far more of this pseudoscience exists throughout the world than the actual science to which we devote our lives in brotherhood. He looked at me thoughtfully. My ash had fallen onto the table, but I did not notice. I could see the expression in his pale blue eyes. He was waiting for me to say something. Of that, I was certain. "Are you saying?" I started to say before stopping. "Ask," he replied forcefully. "Ask. Go ahead and ask." "Are you one of these men?" He smiled broadly. "This pseudoscience must be believable," he said. "Who better than a tenured professor to present the evidence?" "But why?" I asked. "To what end?" "To develop this science without interference from those that would steal it from us." Tentatively, I asked, "And what do you want from me?" But truly, I feared to hear the answer. It should be obvious to you by now, he answered. The Book of Soren itself may be an expression of this science. Pseudoscience? He let out a stream of smoke and laughed. No, he said. I'm beginning to believe that it is authentic, but it is too early for me to say. There is so much of the book that is undisclosed. We sat together and smoked our cigars with a glass of very old Highland single malt. My eyes were closing against my ability to keep them open. It was just too much for me to take in a single day. I needed rest. The professor noticed this even before and he called the servant to show me my room. You must be tired as well, I suggested. He smiled without irony. Your sleeping problems are known to me, he said, but I assure you that they are nothing compared to mine. I have techniques that I will teach you, perhaps tomorrow. But for tonight, I suggest that you try to sleep the old-fashioned way. I think that you may be successful. Good night. May I call you Scott? I nodded in the affirmative. He stood up and held out his hand to me. Good night then, Scott. Francis was there to show me to my room. Large, with a 4-poster bed, private bathroom, thick rugs, a writing desk, along with a walkout terrace or widow's peak, whatever it was, looking out over a vast, fenced-in yard lined with tall, coniferous trees and thick hedges, in sharp contrast to the sick, emaciated earth I witnessed on the way to this house. The room was perfect. On a nightstand was the bottle of scotch from the car, a bucket of ice, and a pitcher of fresh water. Francis nodded. Breakfast will be early, Mr. Brown. I'll knock on your door before I begin, so that you will have time to get dressed and wash up if you like. Thank you, Francis, I answered. When I was left alone, I went to the French doors and opened them. Standing there in the waning moonlight, I felt the cool air against my skin and felt relaxed. So this was Arkham. This was Arkham, where the very air, the very presence of the space is cursed, dangerous. But I noticed nothing unusual. I don't know why I was so nervous. Perhaps there was nothing strange about this at all. Perhaps this was... But then I stopped myself. No, I thought. This was very strange. The landscape, the professor, the house. And I best not let myself become too comfortable. The words of Melanthros came back to me now, warning me of possible danger. And I shivered.